On October 20, 1944, as gray waves rolled onto the shores of Leyte, a tall, unmistakable figure stepped into history. General Douglas MacArthur waded through the surf beside Philippine President Sergio Osmeña, cameras clicking as water soaked his trousers and boots. For MacArthur, this was not just a landing, it was redemption. Forced to abandon the Philippines in 1942 as Japanese forces overran the islands, he had vowed, famously and publicly, "I shall return." Now, 2 years later, American newspapers splash the image across their front pages, transforming a muddy beach landing into a symbol of destiny fulfilled. What the photos did not show was MacArthur's irritation that no proper landing craft had been arranged, or the reality that U.S. troops had already come ashore hours earlier and were pushing inland against only light Japanese resistance. Standing on the beach, MacArthur delivered a radio broadcast that echoed across the islands, promising liberation, justice, and the destruction of enemy control. But even as his words rang with confidence, the truth was far darker. The battle for the Philippines had only begun, and it would become one of the bloodiest, most controversial campaigns of the entire Pacific War. MacArthur expected Leyte to fall quickly. Once secured, its airfields would allow American bombers to strike deep into Japanese positions and pave the way for the invasion of Luzon, Manila, and Clark Field, one of only 2 airfields in the Philippines capable of handling heavy bombers. Prestige mattered to MacArthur, but strategy mattered too. He wanted his Southwest Pacific Command to play a decisive role in defeating Japan, exporting air power across the region. Instead, rain, terrain, and Japanese resistance shattered his plans. Poor weather bogged down American advances, while Japanese aircraft challenged air superiority and reinforcements poured in from other islands. Commanding Japanese forces was General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the infamous Tiger of Malaya, the man who had humiliated the British by capturing Singapore in 1942. Recently transferred from Manchuria, Yamashita greeted his new assignment with grim fatalism, convinced his fate was sealed. Though he wanted to fight a decisive battle on Luzon, Tokyo pressured him to contest Leyte instead. Japanese troops dug into the mountains, forcing U.S. forces under General Walter Kruger's 6th Army to fight inch by inch. By December, Japanese strength collapsed. Airborne counterattacks failed. U.S. troops captured the vital port of Ormoc, and Yamashita withdrew to Luzon with barely 1,000 men. Yet tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers remained behind, harassing American forces for months after MacArthur prematurely declared Leyte secure on Christmas Day 1944. For many Japanese soldiers, faith in victory had already died. One survivor later wrote bitterly of his hatred for the army hierarchy and his certainty that Japan was doomed from the start. Leyte proved more costly than expected, but it gave the Americans what they needed, a springboard to Luzon. In December, U.S. forces seized Mindoro, and soon MacArthur stood offshore gazing at Bataan and Corregidor, the symbols of America's darkest defeat in 1942. The emotional weight was crushing. Yamashita, meanwhile, had no illusions about holding Manila. He considered declaring it an open city and withdrawing to the northern mountains, where he planned to bleed the Americans slowly in an attritional campaign. Luzon held roughly 260,000 Japanese troops, but many were poorly armed, lacked vehicles, and had little coordination. MacArthur believed the Japanese were weak and ordered Kruger to strike fast, racing from Lingayen Gulf toward Clark Field and Manila. Intelligence Chief Charles Willoughby assured him Japanese strength was far lower than reality. Kruger disagreed and favored caution. On January 9, 1945, 6th Army landed at Lingayen Gulf, facing minimal resistance. Within days, 150,000 U.S. troops poured ashore, advancing with the help of Filipino guerrillas who served as scouts and fighters. The greatest threat came from kamikaze attacks, but these suddenly ceased after devastating Japanese losses. As Kruger advanced carefully toward Manila, uncertainty gnawed at commanders.
Was the lack of resistance a sign of collapse or a trap? MacArthur pushed for speed, despite terrible terrain and hundreds of destroyed bridges. His optimism repeatedly outran reality. He announced Clark Field captured before it actually was, angering commanders who were still fighting desperately to take it. As U.S. forces closed in on Manila, mechanized flying columns raced ahead, truck-mounted infantry, tanks, and mobile artillery plunging through flooded fields, shattered bridges, and chest-deep rivers. Photographer Carl Maidans described engines screaming as men dragged tanks through water under fire. From the south, General Eichelberger's 8th Army joined the advance. MacArthur urged him forward with theatrical encouragement, promising glory if he reached Manila first. Paratroopers dropped onto Tagaytay Ridge, many missing their targets, but regrouping with the help of Filipino guerrillas to seize the high ground. But there was another urgency driving MacArthur: prisoner camps. Thousands of American and Filipino prisoners remained in Japanese hands. Previous battles had shown what happened when U.S. forces approached too slowly. On Palawan, Japanese guards had burned prisoners alive. Of the tens of thousands captured in 1942, only a fraction remained alive by 1945. Many were shipped away on hell ships, leaving behind the sick and starving. Conditions in the camps were horrific. Disease, starvation, and brutality were routine. In daring raids, U.S. Rangers, Alamo Scouts, and Filipino guerrillas stormed camps like Cabanatuan, freeing skeletal prisoners who barely recognized their rescuers. Some thought the Americans were enemies from another world. By early February, U.S. troops reached Manila's outskirts and liberated Santo Tomas and Bilibid prison camps, negotiating the release of internees under tense standoffs. MacArthur again spoke of imminent victory and even planned a triumphal parade. But Manila would not be liberated peacefully. Yamashita had ordered the city abandoned, but Rear Admiral Sanji Iwabuchi, commanding naval forces, stayed behind. Whether driven by pride, disobedience, or sheer chaos, Iwabuchi prepared the city for a fight to the death. He had around 16,000 men, many sailors, poorly trained for ground combat, but heavily armed. They fortified key buildings, intersections, and government complexes, turning Manila into a killing ground. Civilians sensed what was coming. As U.S. forces approached, Japanese forces began burning neighborhoods and unleashing unspeakable violence. Civilians were herded into buildings and massacred with grenades and fire. Diaries later revealed chilling entries boasting of hundreds and thousands burned alive. Children were bayoneted, bodies mutilated, women dragged away and raped repeatedly. The violence was systematic, deliberate, and horrifying. American commanders begged for air support to crush the defenses, but MacArthur refused to bomb the city, clinging to the hope of saving Manila intact. His subordinates knew better. They watched the city burn night after night as resistance stiffened. In the south, U.S. paratroopers slammed into the Genko Line, a fortified belt of pillboxes, artillery, and naval guns repurposed to slaughter infantry. Lacking heavy weapons, they stalled until reinforced. Street by street, block by block, Manila became a nightmare of urban warfare unlike anything Americans had faced in the Pacific. Troops improvised assault teams with flamethrowers, demolitions, and bazookas, blasting their way through concrete fortresses. Japanese defenders fought fanatically, vowing to kill with grenades, swords, and even teeth if ammunition ran out. Artillery was dragged forward to fire point-blank into buildings, collapsing entire blocks. After weeks of fighting, only the ancient walled city of Intramuros remained. U.S. artillery unleashed a final, devastating barrage, firing thousands of shells in a single hour. Assault troops crossed the river under smoke, storming breaches in 6-meter-thick walls. Tunnels were flooded with gasoline and ignited, killing defenders trapped inside. Inside Fort Santiago, Americans found rooms stacked with bayoneted civilians, sealed tunnels filled with the starved and suffocated. By early March, organized resistance ended. Yamashita was dead, likely suicide. MacArthur declared Manila secure. The cost was staggering. Over 1,000 Americans killed, more than 5,000 wounded. Nearly all Japanese defenders were dead. But the greatest toll fell on civilians, around 100,000 Filipinos killed, roughly 1 in 10 residents of the city. Manila lay in ruins, one of the most devastated cities of the war. MacArthur had failed to save it. The Philippines campaign continued as Yamashita waged a grim guerrilla war in the mountains until Japan's surrender in August 1945. He was later tried and executed for war crimes, insisting until the end that his death could never erase the suffering inflicted. The liberation of the Philippines cost the United States over 16,000 dead and nearly 50,000